Hey friends, I need your help getting the information out that behavior like this is not okay. I'm going to add a sound to this post so you can understand and see a little bit better what I'm talking about. And part of the reason why this is so disheartening is because now that the app has changed and the algorithm has changed, I'm starting to see this happen almost on a daily basis. And it is incredibly sad to know that people not only think that this is acceptable behavior, but that people like this is the first thing that they think of when they see or engage with our sacred items. If you don't know what I'm talking about, there's a scene from the movie The Proposal. It's almost 20 years old at this point, and I even enjoyed the movie way back when. We've had our laughs, and we've had our laughs about Betty White playing a woman who's supposed to be a Tlingit elder. But what I never saw coming is that almost 20 years later that there would be an app that made this seem to be not only like a trend, but the thing to do. The reason why this is so disheartening to see is because these sacred items, they are a restoration. They are often replicas of poles that used to exist in the many communities that are along the cruise lines, the ports that the cruises come into. And what makes me so sad, not just frustrated, irritated, and infuriated, is that when people see these items, that is the memory that they have. That is the thing that they believe is the funny thing to do. And because these are replicas, what they are not understanding is everything that is behind the reason why they are replicas. What you don't know about our communities is that the buildings like this one and the other ones in the background, those are not the original types of buildings and construction that you would have seen in these communities 100 years ago. 100 years ago and more, there were clan houses, and there were dozens upon dozens of kutia, totem poles like this, on the waterfronts of our many villages and communities. And it's because of the efforts of colonization that many of those buildings were torn down, and in many cases, when these kutia and totems were removed, oftentimes they were burned. So it's very disheartening and sad to see that people don't recognize the damage, the harm that happened to our people and our communities in order to nearly erase our identity. It was not typical to come into our communities and see buildings that were not clan houses. So there are hundreds of clan houses that have been wiped out, nearly erased, in order to put up the buildings that we now see and people think are the identity of our communities, which, if you didn't know, there are things that impact our people. When people don't understand systemic racism, what they don't understand is the history of government efforts that happened before. If you're unfamiliar with Juneau, eminent domain is one of the ways in which our people, our history, our culture, and identity was nearly wiped out, because downtown Juneau sits where one of the original villages for the Aquan people existed. And through eminent domain, those villages were displaced. The people were removed from the land and often not compensated for that land. And eventually, over time, with all of those forced removals, our people were left in smaller and smaller areas. And then we were only left with the Douglas Indian village across the way from where this kutia sits. Once our people were kind of concentrated in that area, eventually then the different bodies of government came in, and when our people went out during the spring to go fishing, that village was burned down. So the identity of our community as Indigenous people was nearly erased. So when people see our sacred items that have been restored and that we have put back out for people to engage with and to admire, And what we see in return is people recreating the scene from the proposal. It's not only disheartening, but it is very frustrating and sad to think that they don't understand everything that we're coming back from. They don't connect it to the boarding school era. They don't connect it to the forced removal of our language, the forced removal of our traditions and our ways of being. For over 100 years, we as Indigenous people were not allowed to gather in community the way that we had for thousands of years. So from 1901 until the late 1900s, we were not allowed to gather as a potlatch, to sing, to dance, to gift each other different items, cultural items, in recognition of our culture and our ways of being. And throughout that time, more and more of our clan houses were removed, and our kutia, our totem poles. And what you don't also know is that some of that lasting impact, the systemic racism that still exists, that people don't recognize as a systemic racism, is that when there are things that dictate what the downtown community can look like, because there is the historical society, and many of the buildings that are in downtown Juneau are held to the standards of the historical society, that the buildings that are built cannot change the identity of what downtown Juneau looks like. And so what people don't understand is that these types of buildings, these were not the original types of construction that made up the identity of downtown Juneau. If we were really being true to the identity of Juneau and this village area, these buildings would look like longhouses. They would have house fronts, they would have formline art all throughout them, and there would be dozens upon dozens of kutia, totem poles lining the waterfront. That is everything that was removed. So when we have the kutia that are out there, it's because we're fighting back not only to be seen, but to preserve our art and our ways of being. And to think that people see these and the only thing that they think of is that scene from the proposal, it's heartbreaking. So please get the word out that using this sound, recreating this scene, is not only not appropriate, but it is heartbreaking for our local Indigenous people to see. Because now that the algorithm has changed with the app, now that the settings are different, I see post after post after post every single day of people using this sound and recreating this scene over and over and over again.